Hello, and welcome to another episode of The End of the Search. This one I call it Sexual Fantasies. Conditioning falls away on its own? It's a question somebody asked me, and the question is, Hi Nick, does conditioning just fall away on its own? Is there anything that can be done? How do you live with that discomfort or resistance to not wanting to feel that movement, like, for example, sexual fantasy? It is like it doesn't matter, but it does matter because it is like a noise there that is uncomfortable. Well, thanks always for reminding me. I'm going to share with you what I wrote to him back, and then we'll elaborate a bit. I said, when you become aware of who you are, the conditioning may or may not fall away. The difference is that it would not matter to you. However, if the conditioning remained to maintain the false identity, once that identity is seen, the conditioning itself has to fall by its own weight. And the discomfort has nothing to do with the conditioning or what is happening. The discomfort, if anything, arises from the resistance to what is already happening. If the desire is there, nothing happens. But if the mind evaluates that desire as something wrong, you will obviously experience the consequence of that evaluation, not of the desire itself. You can now look at the desire innocently while life chooses how to manage it. But I repeat, if the desire arose to sustain a false sense of identity, once that false sense of identity is seen through, that desire would also have to disappear because it would have no meaning since it has nothing to sustain. Okay, let's look at now the question. The person asks if the condition falls on its own. The way I see it is that, or at least this has been my experience, when there's a strong sense of identity, there's desires and preferences or whatever it is that it is used to hold on to that identity. If you belong to a particular group and they have certain rules to belong to that group, and you believe that you are that identity, well, you seem to follow those rules because they seem to be part of your identity. You're thinking, well, this is who I am, and therefore we behave this way. And it seems as though if you're trying to change those behaviors, it's difficult because, I am this particular individual and I behave like this, and this is part of who I am. I see this a lot, people saying, no, but this is who I am. And they're so certain that that's who they are, and they use that as a way of justify their behavior, right? And even if you try to change it and you try to do all kinds of things to change that behavior, at the core, this is who I am. And because this is who I am, and this is the strong belief about it, well, all that behavior, it's actually what supports that belief. But let's say that somehow you no longer belong to that group, and you begin to question their policies and their rules. All of a sudden, just by stepping out from that role, notice that a lot of the behavior that used to be coherent with that particular group, it just drops. Because you no longer believe that you have that identity. You don't belong to that particular group. Okay? Well, right now here, this seeming experience of separation is an experience of lack. And all desires are there to try to fulfill that lack. But the more I rest in the fact that I am, because there's a desire for truth, for peace, when now that is the most important thing, naturally, very organically, all behavior that somehow no longer is coherent with what I am, they fall away. You don't have to try to figure out how to change that behavior. The behavior immediately falls by the wayside because it's not coherent with who you think you are or the new identity seems to be. Now, just for the record, these videos are not about changing one identity for another. These videos are about the recognition that I am, and in this I am, which is not an identity, interestingly enough, then everything that somehow is no longer supportive of that, it just falls on its own. In other words, when peace is the most important thing in your life, everything that somehow no longer support that peace, it just falls away. For example, I don't know if you know, but I don't say that I am, but I mean, I played the role of a musician many times. I had a studio and I record albums. And if you go to my website, which is the musicoflove.com or nickarandesmusic.com, you can listen to everything that I have created. So you can say that music is something that it was a big part of my life. Since this peace that I'm talking about has been the most important thing, God, I don't even listen to music. I don't listen to anything literally that somehow it is not coherent with this peace that I really enjoy. Does that mean that I never listen to music? No, it depends, but somehow I can listen for a little while, and after a while it becomes noise. It's strange, it's just like the mind wants more and more, it craves more and more that peace. And I didn't have to do anything to change that behavior, it just happened that way. Now, let's talk about the sexual fantasies and everything, because I know that probably that's what you want to hear, right? Desires and sexual fantasies or whatever, they simply show up. They arise. You're not guilty about it. You haven't done anything wrong about it. And this is one of the things that the person says over here, that how do you live with that discomfort or resistance to not wanting to feel that movement? No. Don't fight that. It's not about fighting that. And it's not about judging yourself for feeling that either. You see, it's not about feeling guilty because now I shouldn't feel that way. No, that's just what's happening. That's how life is unfolding for you right now. Okay? The more the choice for peace, which is not a choice you make, is what happens through you anyway. This is the paradox of these videos. But anyhow, the more the choice of peace, it's the most important thing. Well, many of those desires, they probably will fall by the wayside. And in many cases, you may have to experience a lot of that for a while before you're ready to drop them. I'm not saying that you have to force yourself to drop them. It's just like you keep putting the attention to what matters, which is the experience, presence, the beingness. And then you notice how life is unfolding anyhow. And like I said before, some of the desires may go or may not. But once again, if you're no longer holding on to an identity that those desires were supporting, they seem to drop on their own, I'll tell you a story. I've heard this many years ago, where there's a monk, a particular monk that came with young monks, little, whatever, and they were going to San Francisco on a trip. And while he, in Buddhism, I think they talk about desirelessness and all that kind of stuff, this maintain a state of no desires or so. Well, anyhow, while they were going in the bus, that monk was very tranquil, just very relaxed being, But the other monks, the young ones, I guess maybe teenagers or something like that, they were so excited. They couldn't control their excitement. They were looking, out of the monastery. They've been in the monastery most of their life, and they're seeing this, the Golden Gate Bridge and all these kinds of things, that they couldn't control their excitement. You see, when they're supposed to be monks, right? Well, turns out that the reasons, you could say, why that monk was so tranquil is because before he became a monk, he was a very successful actor in Europe, I think in England or something like that. So he have tasted everything, fame and desires and pleasures, and now he was ready when he joined the monastery. I think it's a monastery, right? And after that, nothing faced him, because it's kind of like the old quote, I've been there, I've done that, I got the t-shirt. You see? But these kids are just in the exploration process. So you cannot force them not to desire. That comes very organically as part of their process. We've seen, for example, in certain, I don't know what you might want to call it, where they were forced not to have sexual desires because that is called a sin. Well, they begin to believe that, and they feel guilty because they have these sexual desires, and in many cases, well, they seem to express those sexual desires in not very appropriate ways. But it's not because they're bad people. It's because you're trying to really fight against a strong force that is innate in the human condition, because without that strong force, the human condition, the humanity would not be able to survive. Look at the animal kingdom. When it's time to mate, there's a strong force that leads them. They don't send flowers to each other or take each other to dinner and say nice things to try to get them to bed. No, when it's time for mating, they go for it, Well, the same thing in the human condition, although we seem that we can think and everything. When it's time for having that strong desire, is the reason for that is so that the species can continue. Because if we all were, not driven by that desire at some point in our lives, the human species would have collapsed. So that desire has to be there, and that instant pleasure has to be there. We have given all sorts of meanings, but in reality, in the end, if you really look at it, if that desire was not there, then again, the human species would not necessarily survive. That's why people who have somehow in their journey transcended the mind, so to speak, notice that they tend to be celibate, but not celibate because this is a rule, because they don't have the desire, to do that. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody who have transcended the mind can or cannot have children or family. Again, I don't know. I'm not trying to say there's a rule about it, but generally speaking, once you have tasted this piece that we're pointing to, generally speaking, all those desires, they seem to drop. You see? So once again, according to the question over here, there's no need to feel guilty about it. The human condition is filled with desires and movements, and that just happens. It's not something that you control. In the meantime, let's keep the attention to something that is permanent, that is important, which is the peace that is the underline, the background. That's what this is all pointing to. And the way we talk about it in these videos is when you rest in the fact that I am, not identifying with the content of the mind, you begin to experience a peace that surpasses all understanding, while all the movement seems to come up. And they will continue to come up if they have to. But you don't feel guilty about it, you don't feel bad about it. You drop all the rules and all the judgments and all the learned meanings about anything, and you rest in what is. And if the mind says, but if I rest in what is and I become a sex maniac and I begin to do all kinds of things, again, these are thoughts that makes no sense whatsoever once you're resting in the fact that you are. You see? Once you're resting in the fact that you are, if anything, when you believe to be this separate entity, very scarce and very needy, yeah, all these desires and thoughts can seem to have a strong hold on you. But when you rest in beingness, that peace, which is what you are, is kind of swallows you up, And the more you rest in that, again, all behavior that is not coherent with that is going to drop away on its own. In the meantime, again, there's no need to feel guilty because those desires are there. We're not here suppressing them. We're not here covering them up. We're not here to judge them. We're just seeing how life is unfolding according to the script that, we're supposed to live. And now you can simply rest, and that's it. So again, the question, the answer to every single question is the same one. Let's go back to, just being. And just seeing if that is a priority, then you notice how your life unfolds. Being is a priority, and at the same time I notice when there seems to be desires and fantasies and everything. And when I mean fantasy, it doesn't have to be a sexual fantasy. It could be the fantasy of living in this particular town, or the fantasy of I don't know, being on the beach or something. That's fine. I don't have any issues with that. It's just life expressing through this seeming, you might want to call it instrument or whatever. That's just my script, and you have yours. And that's okay. What matters is that when the fantasy comes through and it's seen, you notice. And one of the things that I said over here is that now you look at the desire innocently, while life chooses how to manage it. What does it mean by that? Well, I see how life is using this instrument and manage whatever desires come up. I don't know. In some cases, the desire may come up and I feel like doing nothing. And if in another case the desire come up and I may find myself doing something about it. I don't know. That is life expressing itself through me. And you are life. So we go back again to the simplicity of this. All these ideas and stuff is just the mind. First of all, the desire comes up, and then the mind comes up with thoughts and makes you feel guilty. I shouldn't feel this way. That is because there's rules that we have come up with to support whatever identity we're holding on to, which in this case is the identity I, individual. And on top of that, if I belong to this particular cult or group or whatever, then on top of that, there are these other rules that we put around them. But here, everything is dropped. When you're resting in the beingness, you don't belong to a particular group. You are wholeness. You don't hold on to any particular rules, because nothing applies to the essence of what you are. You simply are. You're resting in beingness, and this is all this is pointing to. And once again, no need to feel bad or guilty because there's certain rules or certain desires or certain conditioning that comes through you. But now we're seeing through that veil. You see? We're seeing through the veil of that dualistic experience, and without guilt and without feeling bad about it. And if you feel guilty or bad, because it's basically what's happened, you just, again, don't have to feel guilty or bad for feeling guilty and feeling bad. It's just, okay, there's a feeling here. Resting I am, and you stay there. That's it. Just be. You're not trying to do anything to let go of anything or to trying to control. Again, this is tricky here because the idea of resting I am, the mind may use it as a strategy. Okay, I resting I am so that hopefully the feeling goes away or that I'll have a particular experience. No, it's much simpler than that. Right now you are. Right now. Whatever you may be feeling or sensing or thinking, or not you who's doing it, but that's just what happens through you. Right now, you are. Are you not? So right now you are. And in the I am that I am, in this beingness, just watch life unfolding. And once again, the more the resting in being becomes the most important thing, then you notice how many of the desires, they seem to drop. They just kind of fall away, and if they don't fall away, they don't have the same hold. Before the desire comes up and you go strongly after it, now the desire comes up, it's like a residue. You say, oh, I can see it. And then you see it. And if you're supposed to go in a particular desire, you notice that life moves you right organically and you don't feel like you have to do any effort. You don't feel like you have to struggle. You notice that life organically is moving you in this direction without guilt, without feeling bad about it. You just notice the movement. And once again, if the mind says, what if life moves me to go ahead and hurt somebody? Once again, that would only come from an identity that belongs to a separate individual, to someone who feels needy, scarce, again, separate. When you rest in the fact that you are, then you are wholeness. And wholeness would not hurt anybody, especially if wholeness knows that it's all that there is. Meaning that if I hurt you, I'm hurting me. And I don't want to hurt myself. I just want to be. And the paradox is that in beingness, you're actually in touch with your essence, which is love. And the nature would not be to hurt others. If anything, would be to hug others. Look at a baby. Baby goes to anybody. And I was watching a video and you see the little baby go to a stranger and wants to hug. But just, again, all that, it's wholeness. We're wholeness. Well, now as an adult, you're not going to hug everybody necessarily, but now you're going to see them with different eyes, with the eyes of non-judgment. Now you see what you see, nothing means anything, and you rest in the peace that you are. And well, this is the inspiration that came through. I hope it served. And as always, may peace permeate the mind so that love can become evident.